Hi, I'm Michelle Molitor. I'm a former teacher and principal, and I'm now the founder and executive director of the Equity Lab.
And I'm Neby. I'm a researcher at the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative working on the education team. Thanks for having us. I'm going to start by letting you all in on a personal secret, which is that while equity and inclusion have always been personal values of mine, I've spent the majority of my career doing rather colorblind research. And not because I didn't believe that racial disparities didn't exist. I would talk about it a lot in terms of DEI and on my teams and in my org, but not in my craft. And I kind of assumed that by doing research with anyone and everyone, that we would naturally address these racial disparities. But that's not always the case. And when I joined the education team at CZI, someone very thoughtfully asked me, what does it mean to be committed to racial equity if you don't proactively go looking for the places in which it shows up in your work? And Michelle, I don't even know this, but it was actually her partner who asked me this question. And in that question, I realized that I don't live my values in my head. I live them with my feet and in my actions. So today we'll talk about how you can make every time that you move your cursor or pick up the pen, it can be an opportunity for you to live your values as inclusive designers. So I'll talk a little about how. Um, just a little context on this case study. So I work with a nonprofit on a free edtech product called the Summit Learning Platform. And there are teachers in about 350 schools, middle schools and high schools across the US that use it to tailor their daily instruction. So in any given classroom, as everyone here might have experienced themselves, you may have a student reading at like a fourth grade reading level, sitting next to a student reading at a ninth grade reading level. And the teacher needs to determine, how am I going to rigorously tailor my instruction so that both of those students are receiving exactly what they need? And so it was my job to work as part of a team to create a UX vision for how we can use technology to support teachers as they're using information about their students to determine who should receive what and when. And so just to like help illustrate that a little bit, here's a screenshot of what an older version of this looked like. So a teacher will be looking at a unit, and on the right-hand side here, you'll see different students and how well they did on different assignments as part of that unit. But as teachers are using this to make as part of their decision-making process, there's a really big critical racial equity consideration here, because we know from lots of past academic studies that teachers, like all humans, are biased, and that they tend to lower their expectations for Black and Latinx students. And so when they see that a student isn't doing well and they're Black or Latinx, they begin to believe it's because that student can't accomplish more. And then over time, that results in that student receiving like fewer materials that challenge them, fewer opportunities for advancement, less useful feedback, and harsher discipline. And this isn't new in education. Many teachers are actually aware of this and are seeking support on how to address these biases. But we knew that we didn't want technology to amplify this inequity. That would be like the worst case scenario here. And so we needed a different approach to this design work. And that's where Michelle and her team came in huge and coached us through how to use the equity by design framework, which incorporates a racial conscious lens into traditional design thinking. So I'll share some of the particular areas that were most effective for us in this work.
The first is to start with yourself. In traditional design processes, we usually start new projects by understanding user needs. In Equity by Design, we start with understanding ourselves. And there's a reason we start with ourselves, our identities. So when you think about race, gender, upbringing, social status, home language, etc., all the things that make you you, where you grew up, how you grew up, all of those inform and create your lens of the world and how you make sense of it. And we have to be aware of this lens and the biases it brings with it as we design. And so let's think about this very simple example that all of us have experience with: getting a gift for somebody. And imagine that you're getting your gift last minute because it's life and that happens. So how many of you have shopped on a wedding registry, or a friend is having a baby And the things that are left because it's last minute are trash cans or salt and pepper shakers or a cake made out of diapers. And you're like, ugh, I do not want to get them that. And when that happens, we often go to this place of, well, what do I want to get them that is going to please me? And this is where our biases even so simply start to come in. So even though we're consciously hunting for a gift for our friends, we're undoubtedly thinking about what it is that we would want. And we all do this. There's no shame in that. But it does have to be acknowledged. So even though you know the gift is not for you, you are never going to use this gift. The gift is for your friend and your intentions are pure. You're still going on your vision of what you think that they might want. If we really want to be thoughtful and thinking about users and being in an authentic and aligned relationship, and in our authentic and aligned gift giving, even in this example, we have to be conscious of this truth, and we have to work much harder to deeply understand what our friend would truly want. And in this case, it's what our user would truly want and what they actually need. So as you rethink the gifts that you're giving to the world, we want you to be thinking about why this is important. And just know that we are subconsciously attracted to things that mirror our own values. And part of equity by design, part of our starting with ourselves, is really getting out of that. And so really recognizing that it can be a big impediment to our work if we're not conscious of it and we don't bring it into the forefront of our design work.
And so in the case study I shared about helping teachers tailor their instruction, I personally needed to look inwards and understand ways that I bring my own identity and my own origin story, which not only creates my lens of the world, but definitely this problem area that I work in. And so kind of during the research kickoff, I wrote 3 ways in which my identity influences my automatic thought patterns about what it may look like to tailor your instruction really well as a teacher. And so I personally, the first part of my education, I grew up in like a very segregated neighborhood where there were not a lot of opportunities for advancement. My local high school had a daycare on campus, which just like paints the reality of what teenage girls were going through in that neighborhood. And then I moved to a more affluent county where most people in my classroom didn't look like me. And so then the purpose of like thinking back through your own origin stories is not to like try and adjust or change that. It's to recognize ways in which your own history shapes my values around what good and bad classrooms look like. And so doing that just like feels uncomfortable. Let's just be honest. We don't typically share stories like that at work. And it's also different from how we were taught to design. So I remember my first UX conference, I was all about like going to different booths and picking up different little swag items. And I remember I don't remember what the organization or company was, but they had these red pins that said, there is no you in user. And I was like, yes, I grabbed like 10 of them. I gave them to my teammates. I wore it proudly, but it's not entirely true. I don't walk into projects that I work on as a clear canvas. I bring myself into that work. So I needed to know what exactly I'm bringing in with me. And so during your own project kickoffs, take 10 minutes to just ask yourself, what are my own values, my beliefs, my emotions about this space that I undoubtedly bring with me? So if you work in workplace software, what are your own values about communication at work that you may be projecting into your solutions? Or if you work for a travel software, what are your own histories about class and what travel looks like that you may unintentionally be bringing into your solutions? And if you're a manager or leader, what are ways that you can prompt your team to reflect on these things at the beginning of kickoffs as well? Okay, so the second tool is in reducing inequities is selecting your target audience, something that like we've all probably had to do. And if the first tool has some like personal discomfort, this one kind of has some team discomfort. Because what is most important is that we are focusing on the most vulnerable. So to do this in our work, we used an approach called targeted universalism, which is originated from the Haas Institute at Berkeley and is often used in public policy. But the idea is that you identify a universal goal. So we want all teachers of all students to be tailoring their instruction. And then you understand how different groups are faring towards that goal. So in our case, we know that Black and Latinx students historically haven't been receiving really good tailored instruction consistently. And then you understand what are the historical structures that have prevented certain groups from making progress towards that goal. And then you identify different strategies for each. So we decided very clearly that we were going to focus on teachers of mostly Black and Latinx students. And not because that we were going to develop solutions only for that group. It's because we wanted to develop solutions that would also benefit that group. And that's kind of the key nuance here. And it's kind of different from also what we typically do. We may focus on who's closest to that goal, who needs an extra nudge, what's the low-hanging fruit, without thinking about the history of who's being left behind and what's their history of being left behind. So think about the last time that you picked a target audience. What was your rationale or your process? If you go back to that strategy doc, what if you added like a little reminder or a cue to like pause and interrogate any biases that you may be bringing with you? How can you remind yourself to like take a moment to think about who would be historically marginalized for this project as you're creating your target audience? And it may be something as small as understanding how your solutions affect different audiences. So that's the second one.
We've talked about focusing on the most vulnerable or the most marginalized. And our third is ceding power. And what we mean by that is that everyone has power inherently. We must acknowledge the power dynamics, though, that allow some votes to count more than others. Ceding power is an inversion of legacy power structures, where we diverge and generate solutions, and the perceived powerful and the powerless work together in the interest of everyone. And so if we really believe that everyone has power, we have to also understand that there's often dissonance between who we are, who we aspire to be, and how we actually behave. And so this reconciliation is both uncomfortable and also discomforting. This dissonance and discomfort reveals what power needs to be ceded and allows us to do our best work and to be in true relationship with one another. And so if we are thinking about that, then the most marginalized people belong in the design and the decision-making processes. The innovation reorders those historical relationships across lines, starting with race, class, and gender. Power dynamics shift and traditional hierarchies are flattened when we really cede power. The positionally powerless and the positionally powerful actually work together, especially along lines of race, class, and gender. The dilemma, its reconciliation, and its impact is defined by insiders with marginalized identities, with powerful outsiders following their lead. I kind of want to say that again. The people that we think have the most information, have the most expertise, are those with those marginalized identities, and can really help you create much better products. And really, our goal is to lead with the genius of the people and the communities you're designing for. The very most powerful results will come from those revitalized relationships.
I like what Michelle, you just said there about leading with the genius of the folks in those communities. The way that we approached it in this specific case study of helping teachers tailor their instruction is doing what we've been talking about this entire conference, which is using participatory design and designing not for, but rather with and by our audience. And so I love that this conference is centered in this because it's really not our default as an industry. Our default tends to view users as recipients of our solutions as opposed to enablers of their own. Our default can be transactional and at worst extractive. And there are also times where we do participatory design rather unproductively, where we believe just by having our users or participants in the room that we are ceding power to them, or by having exciting brainstorm prompts and markers and artifacts, that we are doing participatory design. And What we often forget that is like, put it at the very top of your participatory design checklist is a change in mindset, because we have to go into those spaces instilling the belief in our users, particularly those who are most vulnerable, that their opinion matters, and we have to be ready to accept that. So you can ask yourself these 3 things before you start any participatory design session as part of your prep, as part of your toolkit. Like, go there right now and like jot these 3 things down to help change your mindset. The first is, am I ready to take off my expertise hat? Am I ready to hand over some of my decision-making power as designers? And going back to the starting with self, are you ready to accept solutions that look different from my personal beliefs and values? And if your answer to any of those are no, then you're not truly honoring the intent of participatory design. And so think about a time where you led a workshop that you felt was inclusive, but had maintained the traditional power dynamics. They were kept intact. Like, what is one thing that you could do differently to cede power even more? Or for managers and leaders, what are ways that you can lead by example here or model this for your teams? What are ways that you can make this part of your ritual or norms of how your team is going to engage with your users? So how do you change your mindset? What we did in this, and we were doing participatory workshops with teachers of students who are Black and Latinx to come up with better ways to tailor their instruction. And what we did is we shared a mantra at the beginning of each workshop. And so I'll share a little bit what that mantra looked like.
All right. It's important to have a mantra. It's something that grounds you, brings you back to yourself, helps you with your mind, body, spirit alignment. And so the mantra that we used was I design. And what's going to happen is it's important not to just read it or have it read to you, but to feel yourself say it out loud. And so when we think about that, there's power in hearing and feeling those words as they move through your body. So we're going to pretend that we're in a participatory workshop together. I'm the designer, you're the user. I'm going to say it first, and then I'm going to put it on the screen for you to read. And as I'm reading it first, I'd like you to sit, to pause, to pay attention to what you're feeling in your body and what comes up in you. So our mantra, I design. I design. All people have transformative ideas and have the capacity to change the world. This includes me. Being a designer means that I look for the impact of my actions on people, especially the most excluded. I humbly carry my passion to design new stories. I design. And so we're going to invite you to say this mantra and to feel it again in your body, in your spirit. Say it along with me. And so we're going to bring it onto the screen for you. I'm going to give you just a moment to get yourself together. And I want you, even though you're at home and you may feel silly, say this out loud. See how it feels for you. All right, on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. I design. All people have transformative ideas and have the capacity to change the world. This includes me. Being a designer means that I look for the impact of my actions on people, especially the most excluded. I humbly carry my passion to design new stories. I design. I'll give you 30 seconds to just kind of let that wash over you. Pay attention to what you're feeling in your spirit, in your body, what you're thinking, what words and thoughts, words and phrases are sticking out to you. All right, we're going to keep moving. So to recap what we have done so far today, we just want to remind you that we really believe that we have to start with ourselves. We have to focus on the most vulnerable or the most marginalized, and we have to cede power by changing our mindsets and then actually putting it in action. And to do that, One way that we often practice is by writing user stories using Mad Libs. And we've all written user stories. User stories in lots of ways help us to frame what we're thinking. But what we want to make sure we're doing is that we're not just writing a user story where we think we have the answers to all of it. We want to write a user story with an equity lens overlay and map of it. So if a traditional user story says as a user or as a role, I want to X so that Y, that's not enough. That doesn't really allow us to think about the issues that we're trying to solve in a real world kind of way. And so in order to do that, we're offering to you a different Mad Lib, one with an equity lens that asks you to go much deeper. And so as we think about this one, it's as a description of those most impacted. So right there from the start, we're not just starting with anybody who might use what it is that we're coming up with. We're starting off with who is the most marginalized, the most vulnerable, and how do we name those people. And then we still have a task that we want to accomplish, but that task should also be being informed by their expertise. And then we can name, because what is the unique need for this particular group of people, this group that is marginalized, this group that is vulnerable in this particular situation? And then why can we also name, what's the button and what are the things that make them most vulnerable? And so what's the larger historical and social context, including institutional, systemic, ideological oppression? What's actually getting in their way? And we want to use this equity lens as we're thinking about all of the things that we're trying to design going forward.
So I'll share an example of what it looks like to use this equity lens of a user story in practice. So a reminder of what we talked about of what teachers may be looking at as they're tailoring their instruction. Written using the traditional user story, it would read as a teacher, I want to understand my students' academic progress so that I can tailor my instruction and meet their needs. And so when we come up with solutions based on this user story, we may come up with ways to help guide teachers or add an instructional or tutorial on how exactly to tailor based off of what they're seeing here. Or maybe we would change the hierarchy of the data, where we would take students who are struggling the most and put them at the top of the page. Or what if we made tailoring instruction really bite-sized, where teachers could do it in the hallway while moving in between classrooms? All great ideas to help teachers tailor their instruction, but they're not making up for this gap that keeps Black and Latinx students behind. They would move everyone up, but this gap would remain intact, and that status quo would remain the same. If anything, it may actually be amplified. So we wanted to make sure we weren't just making the current behavior more efficient, but actually lifting up that vulnerable population as well. So after we did those participatory workshops, we wrote new user stories, such as a teacher of Black and Latinx students, I want to not just understand my students' academic progress, but their interests and their aspirations, because we know when teachers see their students as whole people beyond academics, and they're able to share similarities, they're less likely to act in these biased ways. And so that teacher-student relationship is a really critical building block for tailoring instruction, particularly for this vulnerable population. Given the context that we talked about, which is that today, teachers are lowering their expectation for this group. And so the ideas that we incorporated in our UX vision were around how can we help teachers perhaps tailor their instruction based off of students' hobbies. So if you were writing a poem as part of class and one of my students is unengaged, I don't think it's just because they can't do it. I think, okay, well, they're on the football team. Why don't you write a poem about teamwork? And I can help make them make connections with their work. Or what if we highlighted student voice alongside their grade? Or what if we added friction so that we flagged when teachers were continuously lowering their expectations? And so you'll notice what feels different is that we are not just raising all students, we are particularly raising the vulnerable population towards that universal goal. And so this is your homework to do this, and maybe in between sessions or afterwards, what is a user story that you're working on right now that you can use that you can add an equity lens to. And notice what comes up for you as you do this. Because this tool, in doing so, you may notice some friction at first if it's your first time, but recognizing that this tool is only as good as the work that you do leading up to it. This is also available on the community page. The @Neby is the handle. Feel free to grab it there and you can drag it into your own Figma files.
All right, so a recap, we want to make sure that you're starting with self, you're focusing on the most vulnerable or marginalized, you're seeding power by changing mindsets and then also changing your actions. And you can use this user story with the equity lens at the start of any work that you're doing to make sure that you are really bringing in the fullness of the issues that you're trying to solve. We're really excited to see what you'll design in the world going forward.
These are some of our favorite resources. Do like a shout out to the 228 Accelerator. They have a really great fellowship on this that I've gone through, and I encourage other folks to check out as well. Our hope is that you leave today knowing how to take one thing to incorporate a race-conscious lens into your work, whether it's one pause for reflection, one discussion with a teammate over a screenshot, or one tweak to your project or research guide. One way that you can encourage yourself to live your own values with your own feet. Thanks. This was fun. And feel free to reach out and hop in. I'll be around afterwards as well. Take care.
Thanks for having us. Bye.
Bye.